Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bas Terra-Romani. On behalf of the Leiden Cleveringa committee, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the main auditorium. It was here in this very spot that Professor Cleveringa held his protest speech 82 years ago and 2 days. This meeting in remembrance of that act of resistance is hybrid. We have a group attending here in person and a much larger group following us online from all over the world. Welcome to all of you. Together we are remembering that Professor Cleveringa had the courage to protest against the fact that the Nazis forced the university to fire its Jewish staff members, and the fact that he was joined by protests elsewhere in Leiden, by Professor Bartsch at the medical faculty, for instance, and by Professor van Holk at the Faculty of Theology. In different ways, they all proved the incorrectness of the racial doctrines of the Nazis. Bartsch by a direct attack on those doctrines based on his medical expertise. Cleveringa by paying homage to his Jewish teacher and colleague, Eduard Meijers. And Van Holk by speaking about the philosopher Spinoza and the Jewish contribution to Dutch thinking and culture. Many students also joined the protest. About this and about our university today, Leiden University Fund prepared a video message to all alumni and others attending the Cleveringa meetings all over the world, which we will now show.
Welkom alumni en vrienden van de universiteit bij de Cleveringa bijeenkomsten 2022. Op tientallen locaties in heel de wereld staan we samen stil bij de moedige protestreden van professor Rudolf Cleveringa. Ruim 80 jaar geleden stond hij in het academiegebouw voor een overvol groot auditorium. Daar sprak hij zijn afschuw uit over het ontslag van zijn Joodse collega's. Professor Cleveringa was een groot en onafhankelijk denker die stond voor een betere wereld. Een betere wereld waar ook wetenschappers vandaag de dag hard aan werken. Zo is onderzoeker Michiel Veldhuis gefascineerd door de interactie tussen mens en natuur. Hij is als ecoloog verbonden aan het interdisciplinaire programma Livable Planet en onderzoekt op de Afrikaanse savanne de invloed van wereldwijde klimaatverandering.
Het is november en ik sta hier zonder jas. Het is boven de 20 graden hè, en klimaatverandering eigenlijk. En in Nederland heeft dat soms best wel zijn voordelen. Wij vinden het wel lekker warm. Maar op andere plekken in de wereld kan het echt desastreus zijn. Nou, ik houd mij bezig met hoe we de economische situatie van mensen kunnen verbeteren. Aan de ene kant, zonder dat dat ten koste gaat van de leefomgeving. En ik doe dus onderzoek op Afrikaanse savannes, hoe mensen daar een duurzame ontwikkeling kunnen doormaken. In Nederland zijn we enorm bezig met de stikstofcrisis en wat een complex vraagstuk dat is. Maar over het algemeen is duurzame ontwikkeling in Afrika bijvoorbeeld veel complexer, omdat mensen daar veel minder geld hebben. De bevolking groeit enorm hard. In Tanzania is de afgelopen 50 jaar is de bevolking vervijfvoudigd. Klimaatverandering dat heeft een veel groter effect in Afrika met droogte, mislukte oogsten. In Leiden is er een enorme concentratie van milieuwetenschappers. En dat betekent dat ik omringd ben door mensen met allerlei verschillende expertises. Van GPS-zenders, cameravallen, satellietbeelden, moleculaire methodes. En juist die combinatie van al die verschillende dingen, dat leidt tot een beter begrip van ecosystemen en biodiversiteit. Ik ben ervan overtuigd dat we de leefomstandigheden van mensen duurzaam kunnen verbeteren. Zonder dat dat ten koste gaat van bijzondere flora en fauna. Maar er is nog enorm veel werk aan de winkel. En de toekomst daarvan ligt denk ik in de samenwerking met lokale mensen. Een van mijn kerntaken als onderzoeker is het overdragen van kennis. En het opleiden van studenten en onderzoekers uit Afrika is daarbij de sleutel tot succes.
Talent alleen is niet genoeg. Juist nu de wereld duurzame antwoorden nodig heeft op complexe vraagstukken als klimaatverandering en het verlies van biodiversiteit, is het van belang om onderzoekers de kans te geven hun werk te doen. Leiden heeft het talent en de kennis om mee te denken over structurele oplossingen. Met dank aan de schenkers van het Leids Universiteitsfonds maken vele wetenschappers het onbekende bekend en verleggen ze de grenzen van bestaande wetenschapsgebieden. Met uw bijdrage van vandaag werken de onderzoekers en studenten van de Universiteit Leiden aan de wereld van morgen.
Well, let me now introduce today's subject and speakers. We think it's important to commemorate Professor Cleveringa and his colleagues to honor what they stood for, the juridical standards and moral values which made them act. These values are under threat, among others, from demagogy and increasing polarization. All over the world, polarization is on the rise. In an international context, we see the walls that fell at the end of the Cold War being rebuilt in other forms. The war in Ukraine is the most shocking example. But even within countries, bridges between groups would seem to be breaking down. People are less and less willing to understand each other, and fierce language and harsh actions are increasing. We see that even in our own parliament in the Netherlands. Today's subject, therefore, is the question of what to do about this polarization. Is there a way back to start talking again with each other? We've asked this question to two professors and also to a student speaker. We will start with 3 short presentations, followed by a debate. So as we also wanted to hear the voice of a student, our first speaker will be Mitchell Wiegand-Bruss. He's working on his master's degree in history, but is also one of the founders of Students for Leiden, a political party, and he's one of its 2 members in the Leiden City Council. He and his friends felt that student input was not taken into account enough. And as a council member, he focuses on involving students and young people in policies. A voice for future generations, so to speak. Our next speaker will be Professor Dominique Moisy. He's senior advisor to the Institut Montaigne in Paris and visiting professor at King's College London. At Leiden University, he is the first holder of the OADA chair, which focuses on interaction between international law and international relations through interdisciplinary approaches. Moisy has published extensively on polarization and the role of emotions in political discourse and international relations. In 2018, he received here in the Netherlands the Spinoza Lens International Prize for this work. Finally, Professor Kutsal Yesil-Kayit is Professor of International Governance. As such, he is driven by a desire to understand how political administrative systems work. He investigates how politicians, civil servants, and public institutions influence the outcomes of policies and social events, and thereby the lives of individual citizens and groups. Polarization plays an important role in these studies, and it is also the subject of a major research project which he has just started, entitled Governing Polarizing Societies. First, these 3 speakers will present their views. This will be followed by a debate between the 2 professors, later joined by Mitchell Wiegand-Bruss and the audience here and online. The debate will be led by our committee member Julia Sterneberg. She is a law student and also serves on the board of the Minerva Student Association, the Collegium. I will now first give the floor to our student speaker, Mitchell Wiegand-Bruss.
Hey asshole, why don't you let grown-ups govern? We don't need your shitty student party in our city. Students are not even permanent residents. Fuck you. This is just one example of reactions me and my fellow members of my political party received after we published our plan to participate in the local elections of 2022. Without knowing what my party stood for, what we were going to say, or what our plans for Leiden were, this very vocal group of people reacted to the fact that students founded their own political party. Students, young people who wanted their voice to be heard. Our age and social group was apparently enough for these people to ignite a fire of anger among a very small group, and that was spread throughout the city. It resulted in us meeting with the police on the basis of threats to our members in the first months after the announcement we would stand for election. It showed me that even in Leiden, on a very local scale, polarization is present in our politics. I don't want to talk about this problem today. I want to talk to you about the prevention of this problem. When I talk to teenagers about politics, what they tell me is that they know a few politicians. They know Wilders, they know Baudet, they know Simons, they know Van der Plas. They know the politicians that raise their voice and tend to become part of an extreme club of politicians. Moderate politicians are mostly unfamiliar with teenagers. In a report published by the GEP, the Dutch Platform for the Prevention of Youth Extremism and Polarization, they find that there are two central causes of why young people become polarized. First, young people struggle to find a connection with the political institute that needs to represent them. Partially because these institutes are difficult to understand and feel elitist. Second, young people are very sensitive to polarizing influences. Those who don't feel a connection with these institutes tend to not have a connection with society as a whole. What they do is they seek this connection with their peers. They seek this connection with people of similar ideas and backgrounds. When this happens and it is not recognized by their teachers or their parents, ideas within these like-minded groups can become extreme, can become an extreme form of political affiliation. These are the two central causes of why polarization occurs among young people, according to the GEP. How then can we make sure we prepare our future voters for the increasingly individualized and polarized political field? Polarization is the lack of understanding each other. It is the lack of politicians to understand their voters. It is the lack of educating our youth on our political system. It is the lack of political institutions to become more transparent on our own system. When I founded my political party, it was with the goal of creating mutual understanding between the young people of Leiden and the very council that needs to represent them. It shocked me that most of the young people I spoke to had no idea what the municipal council even does. And the municipal council had no intention of changing this. This results in a lack of mutual understanding and thus increases polarization. If we want to tackle polarization on a very local scale, we need to start by educating our youth on the workings of our political system. One of the goals me and my party members have set for ourselves is to keep inviting high school classes to our city hall and give them the opportunity to experience and learn about the political system on a very local scale. In return, local politicians, such as myself, must become more transparent in their work and set the example by emphasizing similarities rather than differences. We must open the doors of our institutions even more in order to create mutual understanding between what we do and how young people feel about what we do. Only then can we really tackle the first central cause of polarization among young students. Tackling the second cause begins with understanding that polarization is emphasizing differences and denying similarities. Teenagers and students alike struggle to talk about mutual differences of cultural, ethnic, or political origin. Because when they do talk about these differences, the discussion can become increasingly heated. It has become difficult for teachers to moderate the discussion on these differences. What I have encountered in my visits at high schools is that these schools often don't have a framework to help these teachers. They are not prepared enough for the difficult conversations that are held in the classrooms. Even here, at our own university, teachers and professors struggle sometimes to facilitate this debate, and similarities can be overlooked. When a debate or discussion on differences is not held or not properly guided, teenagers and students could develop the feeling they are not heard, or sometimes even feel their opinion is invalid. This must not happen. We must not walk away from these difficult discussions. We must, therefore, the people in this room, the people who teach, develop tools to help teachers, to help parents, so that they can become more comfortable talking about the differences among their students, and the young people will not surround themselves only with people that they recognize, like-minded people, and won't fall into the deep pit of emphasized difference. Only when our youth is equipped with the knowledge of our political system, our teachers have the tools necessary to facilitate difficult debate among students, and our politicians and institutions are transparent, can we really start to tackle these two central causes of increased polarization among our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. We already see the outlines of a solution. Professor Moisi, may I invite you?
Thank you very much. It's moving for me to find me at a lower, in a lower position a few months after. 80 years and 2 days. I feel that the spirit of Cleveringa is alive in the streets of Iran or in the streets of China, because this is what it is all about, the refusal to remain passive in front of what is becoming, what was for a very long time, totally unacceptable. It's a kind of revenge of moral values at the risk of your own lives. And I think it is very important that you should keep that memory alive. I have a very short time today to speak on the subject of polarization, and I have two quick messages to deliver. The first one is that emotions are a threat to the democratic process. They have become weapons against democracy. And it's important to understand how and why. And the second message is that democracy is much more resilient than we could think. And it creates its own antibodies. There's a kind of dialectical process by which the more enormous the absurdity becomes, the more people coalesce, unite, in the name of rationality, freedom, and ultimately democracy. What is the manifestation of polarization? Where does it come from when you link it to the concept of emotion? I see, in fact, 4 key emotions which are at the very basis of the process which we are studying with concern. The first emotion, clearly, by far the most important one, is fear. Fear of the present, fear of the future, fear of the other, fear of what we are becoming ourselves, fear of not being able to control either the world around us or even our very own identity. This emotion is, to my mind, by far the most important one. And this is the one we have to resist. The second emotion is anger. And I think fear has always been there, except it grew. Anger is growing. It's growing for a mixture of reasons. One of them being social and economic, the explosion of inequalities. Blue collars, workers in democratic societies like the United States 50 years ago felt that they were belonging to the middle class. They were proud of what they had achieved. They are no longer. And they accuse the elite of their new and reduced status. And that plays a huge role, together with fear, in the creation of polarization. The third factor is the use of history in the most negative way. We call that resentment. Resentment at the way you are treated, or you feel you are treated. You feel that the world that is around you is no longer the world you used to live in. And that resentment is very much linked to the fourth emotion, which could be in itself a positive emotion, but which has turned to be negative. And that is the negative use of nationalism. You love your country, your nation, la patrie, the French would say. But you love a vision of that nation that first never really existed, and second, that you use as a weapon to disparage what this concept has become. And so if you combine fear, anger, resentment, and a distorted vision of nationalism, you can understand most of the polarization phenomenon that are taking place in the world. From the United States to Latin America, from Latin America to Western Europe. Not to mention the countries that are clearly not Westerners, but that share that same evolution. So it looks tragic, dangerous. You have the feeling somewhere that Trump may not last, but Trumpism is there to stay. You may have the feeling that Bolsonaro has been defeated in Brazil, but Bolsonarism is here to stay. You have the feeling, looking at my own country, France, that so far, with a little bit of luck, we've remained an oasis of hope in an ocean of despair. And that little bit of luck was the destructive temper of the extreme right, not able to find the proper candidate to come to power, and the positive accident that was President Macron. But there is the feeling, the real fear, that in fact Macron could know the fate of Barack Obama, that he has in fact been Obamized, in the sense that he will be remembered more by his speeches than by his results, and that he will leave power after 2 mandates to someone he has been fighting to destroy. Because I can't say that Marine Le Pen will not come to power in 2027. So I think one has to realize at the same time how deep polarization is, how difficult it will be to surmount. In fact, if I want to summarize in one expression, what is polarization about? Polarization exists when your adversary, in political terms, is looked at as your enemy. And this is impossible to accept, especially in the world we live in. So my first part is to say, yes, it's very serious. And yes, it's not going to disappear miraculously. But, and this is my second point, there is hope. It's not winter is coming, winter has come. But because winter has come, spring may return. And spring may return, and we see already that in the results, in particular, of what happened in the midterm election in the United States a few weeks ago. Everybody was expecting a red tsunami. The Republicans were going to seize the 2 houses. Joe Biden has done much better in this midterm election than most presidents before him in the last 50 years. And he had a secret weapon, which he used marvelously. And that secret weapon was called Donald Trump. And he managed, I think a lot of people were accusing him before the election, remember. They said, but it's about inflation, it's about life, cost of products. He said, no, this election is about democracy. It's about the right of women to dispose of their bodies. And he was followed. Like in 2020, and unlike 2010 or 2018, when Obama and then Trump were badly crushed in midterm election, he nearly won the day. Young people, this is where you are, mobilized in a positive, non-cynical manner. They thought that it was worthwhile fighting against Trump and against what he represented. And to me, it is the demonstration that moralism or a call to moral values is not non-necessary. It is absolutely necessary. If you distinguish radically between politics and morality, you go in the wrong direction. And this is where I think the message of Professor Cleveringa is so important. He reminds us that the greatest danger is when we give in to cynicism, when young people or not so young treat the other that doesn't share their vision as the enemy, whether they are from the extreme left or the extreme right. And the extreme right is more efficient because it plays even more on emotions than the extreme left, which doesn't mean that the two should not be fought against with the same energy and determination. But I think, and this is what I deeply believe, the battle has not been lost. To the contrary, I think we are not winning the battle, but we are far from having lost it. And this is the message I want to convey to you at my age and with my experience. This is the time to start the good fight. Look at what's happening in China. Look at what's happening in Iran. Look at what's happening in Russia. We were told that authoritarian regimes were the model for the day. That according to the title of a book that was published a little more than a year ago, The Age of the Strong Man. Well, the strong men are not that strong. Be they Putin in Russia, the Ayatollahs in Iran, or even Xi Jinping in China. Thank you very much.
Very many thanks. A serious message, but there's still also room for hope, and that's good to know. Professor Yessel Kayet, may I invite you?
Thank you very much, Cleveringa Committee of Leiden, to give me this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on this so important topic. And it's also an honor to stand here 80 years after Professor Cleveringa's speech here and to commemorate him. Although the situation is not as dire as in this time, still we have some concerns. If you look around at the news media, we see intimidation, threats, violence has become a daily occurrence. Activists against Black Pete are attacked by a mob under the watchful eye of cameras and the police. Radical farmers seek redress from ministers and politicians. Hate and racism is erupting when asylum seekers are coming to your town. Less violent, but no less intimidating, is the cancel culture, which in the eye of people who claim to stand up for marginalized groups want to suppress the voices of persons with wrong opinions and who do not use the right words. Even paintings are not safe anymore today. So, but once we live in a time where one's own moral right has become the ultimate truth, and one's own truth doesn't tolerate compromise. The culture wars between radical exclusivists who on the one side consider their own group and race to be superior to all others, and radical inclusivists on the other side who strive for radical equality seem to have the middle ground under control. But can we say now that there is a surge in polarization? Are citizens of the Netherlands and other democracies, are they now really drifting dangerously far apart from each other in terms of their political and social views? The jury is still out on this matter. Dutch sociologist, and I will talk to the Netherlands for a moment, And political scientists who have been working on this question for a time, different opinions. Whereas one sociologist says that these times has been the most turbulent of all since the Second World War. Other sociologists looking at public opinion data from decades old see that there's no real polarization. But national elections and election survey studies show that there is an increasing demand for radical right-wing parties. Oh, and it's also the case that Corona, so whatever direction we are going, Corona has opened up the gates to anti-state and anti-democratic currents. And the war in Ukraine, the climate problem, asylum issues are further exacerbating ideological contradiction between citizens. It's nowadays quite common to mention global warming and the theory of repopulation in one and the same breath. The so-called hoax of global warming has become the driving mechanism behind the repopulation theory. So we are living in a time where the question comes up that we didn't have to ask for a very long time. How much polarization can a democracy tolerate? Is our democracy sustainable enough? And the election of Orban, Trump, Bolsonaro, and other authoritarians show that democracy can be defeated by its own means, through elections. As years ago, in a different context, one former Minister of Justice, Peter Donner, referring to Sharia and Islamic fundamentalism, he once mentioned that if the majority of this country votes for the Sharia, then Sharia will be established. It's just like that. And abolishing democracy is an irreversible decision. We can take all decisions in democracy by a simple majority, but abolishing democracy is a one-way decision. Once it's gone, it's gone. So to what extent is democracy resistant to extreme polarization? I fear that there is no emergency brake on democratic decay. If it goes, then it goes. This is a rather pessimistic view, I know. But to protect and preserve democracy, we need realism. We need to look the lion into his mouth. So in the next part of my speech, I have 3 points that I consider might somewhat delay or even reverse this trend towards decline of democracy. First of all, I believe that we should not shy away from most egregious measures, weapons that democracy has to stop anti-democratic currents. I'm referring here to measures like the ban on political parties that propagate anti-democratic, anti-rule of law positions. I also refer to the legal prosecution of individuals or groups that directly or indirectly call on citizens to overthrow democracy. In this, we should not be naive and believe that, as we do so often in the Netherlands, that we will talk our way out of it, that we will polder our way out of it. Because the radical extreme wings from the left and the right, they are so much immersed in their own truth that they do not accept a compromise on their truth. We as Democrats should not compromise on the values of democracy. This brings me to my second point. So we have to stand firm against those who want to overthrow democracy and stand our position there. There is a, So the second point is that we should also think about the viability of our democracy. How sustainable is our democracy? The system, the parliamentary democracy that we know nowadays, was established, emerged 180 years ago. And 180 years from now, it may not look like the same as it does now. And if I talk about the rethinking of our democracy, I think about the electoral representative aspect of democracy. We know that democracy can be defeated through elections, through free and fair elections. A political party, a political power can come to power that can overturn democracy. It is happening in Hungary, Poland, and other countries. And it happened for a while in the US. But when parliamentary democracy in danger of disintegrating, what other institutions or practices can bring about this return? I always tell my students that you have to think about the values that keep our democracy as it is. What is the most important value? What are the most important values in our democracy? That is freedom, that is participation, and that is to be represented. But if the electoral aspects of democracy are offering ways to extreme groups to overtake democracy, then we should look at other institutions. One of these institutions is to experiment further with citizens' participation. In a lot of cities, municipalities, there are established citizen panels and there are established arrangements for co-creation where citizens, together with civil servants and the municipalities, think about new policies. We should also think about the role of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a very important institution in our society. When the parliamentary system breaks down, is on the verge of breaking down because of fragmentation and because of volatility, we need civil servants who are upholding the values of the constitutions. Civil servants are the ones who translate majority political decisions into policies for citizens. They are the ones who translate public values into practice. And when the chosen pillar of democracy becomes fragmented, is on the verge of disintegration, it is the bureaucracy as the unelected pillar that must stand up for democratic values of our society. And we need a civil servant that sees itself as agent of the Constitution, as guardians of the rule of law, and protect the rule of law, even against democratically elected illiberal politicians. A final point that we can use to rethink our democracy is by looking for administrative arrangements that secure a number of public interests and public values outside of the direct realm of elected politicians. We have experiences with non-majoritarian institutions like central banks, independent privacy authorities, independent equality bodies. These are not strange institutions to us. We have a set of institutions that are independent from directly elected political control, and they are staffed with experts and a representative society who can make decisions on behalf of these elected politicians. In order to secure and to defend some of these values from the day-to-day fragmentation, from extreme polarization within the parliament, we should rely much more on bodies that are not held directly under control of electoral bodies. And this may sound strange and counterintuitive in a democracy. But again, the most important institutions that made the Dutch pillarized societies in the 20s and 30s survive was by organizations that were not directly under control of parliament. Just to make sure that the values of citizens were also represented at the moment at that place where decisions are taken. So, after having stressed 2 points, first, we need to stand firm and defend our democracy, and we should not be shy away from using the most firm actions against those parties and groups that want to abolish our democracy. And we should rethink our democratic institutions, and we should also think about the checks and balances, even when they are not directly subjected to electoral politics. My final point is that we need to rethink and reinvent the nation state. The nation state is a concept that comes from the 19th century. Nation building has been very important for the development of not national states, but also very important for the development of democracy. Building a nation meant that citizens living in a specific territory came to see each other as fellow citizens, came to identify themselves with the higher symbolic norms and values. They also, and that is important, they also came to see and understand themselves to be part of a community of faith. Their destinies were torn together. A nation state, and the idea that citizens living in a specific territorial area also enabled the welfare states. Recognizing someone as a fellow citizen also enabled you to help that fellow citizen, although you don't know that person. But nowadays, the nation state the idea of nation state is being captured by extreme right. They use it for their nationalist agenda. They want to recreate nation states as uniracial, uni-ethnical entities. But I think if you are there for democracy, and democracy will still, and national states will still be the most important political entities in world politics, we need a new story, we need a new narrative that binds citizens together. Not in the 19th century way where nationalism, also nation building, meant competition with other nations, which led to imperialism and colonial wars. But a nation that, the idea of a nation that connects people and shows that their destinies are torn together, and that the destiny of our own nation is also interconnected to the destinies of other nations. And we have a common enemy. It's climate change, it's worldwide poverty. So the way that nation states helped sustain and create a democracy 100 years ago, we should also build a new story for the nation that helps, that reminds people that our fates are interconnected to each other. To end with a more positive note, yes, the events in China and Iran are very hopeful. We see that dictatorships are not that efficient as we fear that they are. We in the West have the idea that dictators are better capable of managing their countries and keeping their power safe for the long term. But dictators have the same problems to steer a country as democrats, because the social reality is so complex and nothing can be controlled from one single point. But let's be the hope that we do not live within in a dictatorship and to find out our flaws ourselves. Let's hope that we can turn the democratic decade long before dictatorship sets in. Thank you very much.
Well, a clear program with 3 points. Makes me look forward to the debate. Julia, Kutsal, Dominique, may I invite you to take a chair here and a microphone? And I give the floor to Julia.
Yeah. Yes, well, thank you, Bas, and thank you, Mitchell, and Dominic, and Kutsal, for sharing all your interesting views with us. And thank you to the committee for trusting me with leading this debate. Well, it's an honor, definitely. And since Kutsal was the last speaker, I would like to start by asking you, Dominic, what do you think of Kutsal's 3-point program to repair the situation? Do you think it's necessary at all, given the resilience of liberal democracy that you see? Like, for example, the ban on political parties that, want to destroy the democracy?
No, I agree with what you said after me. And in particular, the need to reinvent the nation state. This is fundamental. I remember in 1990, I had written a report for Jacques Delors calling for the need to favor a European emotion, a European patriotism, so to speak. He was furious at me. He in fact nearly destroyed my report and put it in the dustbin. Because he says, but no, Europe was created to make sure that those kind of nationalism would not return. How can you dream of creating a European nationalism? And I stood firm, and I said, Mr. President, if we don't create a European emotion, we'll have a return of various nationalism with a vengeance. In retrospect, I think we were both right, but for different reasons. I think my dream of creating a European emotion was linked to my own story, to my own generation, and was, in fact, just that, a dream. You just have to watch the soccer World Cup. A European team would not work. Can you imagine a European team confronting an African team, an Asian team? No, no way. No way, it's too abstract. And what really matters is your team. I can sense in my own country, France, a sense of growing trepidation. We thought we were not going to play a role, and suddenly we realized that we may be playing a role. And this is something totally irreplaceable. So the problem, and I agree fully with the way you presented it, is to make sure that the nation you defend, you promote, is a nation based on values, on respect for the difference of others, on multiple identities within one group. Just the opposite of the nation defended by Marine Le Pen in France or Giorgia Meloni in Italy. But that presupposes that the moderate are passionately moderate. And the problem with moderate is that they tend to be moderately moderate. And they cannot defend moderation with the necessary passion that would oppose the voice of the extreme. So I agree. And I agree also with the fact that, well, it's a famous Saint-Just sentence during the French Revolution. There is no freedom for the enemies of freedom, except it's one of the most dangerous sentences that was ever uttered in political life. It's right, but it can lead to the most perverse variation. Who defines what is, by the end of the day, an enemy of freedom? You just decide that the person who is opposing you is an enemy, an absolute heresy, and that's it. So you have to play with it with great care. So you need passion to defend a moderate view of nation, and the greatest of care to oppose parties that are truly dangerous for democracy and that do not play by the rules. This is, Julia, my already too long answer to your question.
No, thank you. Well, yeah, because obviously you make a plea for reinventing the nation state. But like, how does the nation state square with the European Union? And yeah, what do you think on the whole topic of making a more European democracy and identity?
Thank you very much. As Dominic also said, mentioned about this European dream, we must realize that was the ideal. This is the ideal of many people, liberal thinking people in Europe. That we would, the idea that we would be moving forward towards a single European identity, that all men would be brothers, like this famous Beethoven hymn. So, but I came to be more realistic in the sense that national states and not only in soccer, are the most important entities. It's because there it is within national states that the battle between extreme is taking place. Of course, there are transnational bound relationship between extremist groups in the Netherlands or in Europe, but it's there where liberal Democrats don't have an answer to the populist claims about the elite that is against the people. So in order to counter this, we need to establish a new identity, a new nation idea that fits within this time. And well, the classic Dutch sociologist Abraham de Zwaan, in his book on the emergence of welfare states, he showed that the welfare state and therefore nation building emerged because everyone living within a country realized that that your well-being and your health was depending upon the health and well-being of others. So if there's sewages in the poorer part of the city were not drained or modernized, then also the richer part of the city would get ill. So, and there is an interconnected fate. Yeah, your fates are related to each other, and we need a story that is making this clear not only at the national level but also within Europe. The fate of the peoples who live in Europe, and it very much depends, of course, on what type of story you tell about who the enemies are. And the story needs to bring together a diversity of people under the same symbols. But it's possible. It depends who tells the story. There's this wonderful book I read when I was a PhD student of Eugene Weber about turning peasants into Frenchmen. Yeah. And there you see the story of a very diverse France that through education, your point, Mitchell, through teachers became a single nation. And it depends on who tells the story and what is explained to be the nation. If you now allow the story to be told by extreme right groups, then they will have a very narrow nationalistic narrative of the nation state. But I think that the liberal Democrats should gain the momentum, take the momentum, and be on the ball to formulate a narrative for the nation that is supportive of democracy and interdependence between in Europe.
Could I jump on that last point and emphasize a little bit my experience of Franco-Dutch relations? I remember in the early 1980s a meeting at the top level of the foreign ministry in France. And the final word was, if the Dutch and the Danes are against this proposal, it means we are in the right direction. And I think on the other end, you could say that between feeling a sense of dependency towards the United States or a sense of dependency towards France, a majority of Dutch people will always choose the first to the second for reasons that have nothing to do with Europe, but to a large extent to European history, to a reading of the past. And so this is our responsibility, to return to the nation state without returning to the petty nationalism that led us to suicide between 1914 and 1945, and taking into account the fact that the last 60, 70 years were not useless, were not simply a parenthesis of hope and dream, but something that was absolutely essential to reconcile Europeans with themselves, their history. And so this is the need we have to find. In a way, the compromise between the reality of today, and the future needs for tomorrow. Alone, we are nothing. Together, we are not that much, but a little more. And that was Angela Merkel's sentence. We are 80 million Germans. It's the biggest country in Western Europe, but alone we are really nothing. And this is true and wrong at the same time, because and this is where I go back to my sense of values and norms. It's not a minus to incarnate moral values in the world. It's a plus if we do it with modesty and not arrogance, with realism and not pure idealism, and with the sense that it's one weapon amongst others, not the most important one, but if we don't have it, the rest will not click together.
Thank you very much. And you as well, thank you. But now for the sake of time, I'll give the word to Mitchell, our student politician, to give a short reaction. And after that, there will be time for people in the audience to ask questions. And I think also Idema behind here is in contact with people who are watching the live stream. So if they have questions, then we'll do those afterwards as well. But Mitchell.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot about international politics, national politics. Well, my sort of expertise is local politics, of course. Oh, no, I will say it's okay. But a question I have, you talked about fear, Dominic, and the people who are afraid of something they lose. If we are banning a political party, something that Kutsal said, aren't we creating more fear within the people that are already afraid? Is that not counter-intuitive to preserve our democracy? It's a question to both.
Yeah.
Would you like to start?
Yeah, of course. In a 15 minutes pitch, you try to be as firm as possible. But when I was talking about the ban of political parties, I was quite well aware about the dangers that you also mentioned. You know, if you're going to ban a political party, then why is a political party then deemed the enemy? But my point is that if you don't ban a political party, then that political party will gain traction. It will have the floor. It will have a legitimacy because they are elected, and they feel free to act and talk and spread ideas that are dangerous for the preservation of democracy. And of course, it's very difficult. And banning political parties is not something that should be taken very lightheartedly. But if you do not take this weapon in your arsenal as a Democrat, then you run the risk of allowing the spread of ideas and allowing a platform to parties that are against democracy. And of course, the counter-argument is always that why don't you fight against these political parties through the debate? You can debate them, you can defeat them at the elections. But that doesn't exactly work like this. It's in politics, one of the important theories about political mobilization is that political parties try to mobilize the indifferent citizens. So you may not be interested in politics for a very long time and vote on a party that you feel that represents your interest best. But it's this latent group of people who are not interested or indifferent to different positions that can be persuaded to vote on that party for whatever reason. So, and allowing a party that is obviously and maybe judged by the courts that goes against the values of democracy, you run the risk of broadening that base.
Well, I think one of my answers to your question would be, first we have to realize that we are about to be confronted with a new generation of populist leaders. They are aware of their limitation, of the reason why in most countries they fail, to come to power, to stick to power. They want to appear as more moderate. They want to appear as more competent, more professional. And we have to treat them accordingly, seriously. We can't any longer dismiss them as if they were nothing. They are something. First, because they represent a lot of voices, and second, because they worked. I can see the change in the Rassemblement National, in the Marine Le Pen party. She's much, much better today than she was 5 years ago. And if she continues to be that on that line of improvement, the risks are real. At the same time, when I look at the Italian situation, Giorgia Meloni, she's a very strong adversary because she really comes from the people. She has roots in the people. And she worked hard. She no longer opposed Europe the way Salvini or Berlusconi were doing before her. She's very strong on Russia, against Russia. She learned a great deal. She's repulsive to me on her values, on her attitude to migrants, on her attitude to societal differences. I reject what she represents, but I respect the political opponent she has become. In Great Britain, it's very interesting. For the first time, we find ourselves with a leader, Rishi Sunak, first who is Indian. It's a revolution. Someone born, whose parents were born in the Raj during the period where India was being controlled by Great Britain, is now the Prime Minister of England. It's a true revolution. And this man is looking at Brexit with a very different eyes. He's rational. He's still a pro-Brexiter, but no longer behaves as a populist leader. And Trump is, to my mind, on his way out. There's no way back for Trump. It's over. And it doesn't mean that Ron DeSantis may not become the next president of the United States, but it will be a different model of populism. And from that standpoint, we've won a battle, but we are far from winning the war. That is the point I think we share, the two of us.
Yes, thank you very much. I was wondering if there's anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question. We have a microphone here. I think we have a question back there.
What do you think is the role of social media at the moment? Because if I look at my grandchildren, they are more or less glued to their phone. All the information they got is from the phone. So what is the role of the social media in today's politics?
Is this question specific to anyone, or would any of you like to react?
Well, very quickly, I think the information and communication revolution has played against democracy because it has allowed the spread of fake news, of hatred, message, whatever. And so we have to learn to live with that. But it's like the emotions I started with my presentation. These are media that is by nature playing against democracy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And about to add, we should also start to regulate that area. We regulate everything. Regulate and the entrance of medicines to the market. We regulate competition between firms. We regulate product safety. We regulate to some extent the broadcast. And we should also be able to regulate on social media to some extent that does not interfere with the content either, but subject to the normal laws that are against anti-democratic, illiberal things and fake news.
But you don't see it as a real threat to what you're just proposing, because what we miss out is that social media plays a far bigger role than we, as the elder, can imagine, especially those who are in fear. They see their sons on their phone. They're just put their faith in what they get back.
Yes, I understand your point, but it's not the medium itself that is dangerous. If we would allow markets to be really free, then we would end up with predatory capitalist situations.
Yeah.
But it's not the medium that is the mistake. It's the way that we look at it and how we want to regulate on it.
Okay, thank you for your answer. Thank you for your question. I'll have a look back here. Is there a question from someone at home?
There's one question from an alumnus from Belgium, who is a question for the first speaker. He's very interested which kind of political party he is representing.
Well, as Bas already said, it's a local political party with only students as members of our council.
Yeah, okay. Maybe there's another question, yeah?
Another question from the audience? Yeah.
Oh yes, my name is Jaap Mond. I have the question, what I'm missing actually in politics is politicians with a vision. I mean, only I think about Macron. He has an idea how he wants to have Europe in the future, but for all the other politicians in Europe, and especially in the Netherlands, I don't get an idea how they see the world in the future. So it's not that what is lacking in Europe at the moment.
I think it's for you. You are Dutch.
Are you certain or you don't want to answer? No, and I agree to a certain extent with you. And that was also lying behind my point about reinventing the nation state. We need this bigger narrative, and politics has become over the past decades too much technocratic. The 1990s, the 2000s were the decades where the neoliberal paradigm was dominant. Markets were said to be free, and we really believed in that freer markets would bring more prosperity and freedom, and in the end, democracy. So many politicians became pragmatic. Our own prime minister once says, if you're looking for a vision, you should go to you should have new glasses, to the optician, but we are in what we are now living in a hollowed out state, a state where the elected representatives of the people do not have this vision. And that's what's lying underneath the point about we need a new narrative that binds us together and shows how our fates are interconnected to each other. But I'm optimistic because we have young politicians here, and older politicians will be replaced by younger politicians, and there will always be reactions. So I'm very hopeful that the new generation of politicians will come with a new narrative.
I don't have the time. Do you have time for one more question?
I think so. If there's one more question.
Here.
Okay.
I have a question for Professor Jesselkagi. If the majority of people elects a dictator, is it their right to do so? Isn't banning a political party anti-democratic?
Is electing a dictator by free elections, is that, and then banning that party, it is, because it's an irreversible decision. And that's the inbuilt weakness of democracy. Democracy in a thin version, it's a set of rules that through which we elect the persons who are going to represent us and how we hold them accountable. It doesn't have any moral center in it. So, but if by a majority, when a majority emerges that is in favor of a dictator, then if that happens and there's a really majority, then all things are gone. But before we come to that point, we should do the things that Professor Moisy and I are just talking about. We should fight against it. We should not allow it. And another point is related to it. I also find it very annoying that now, especially in the Netherlands, now we are seeing that parliament is fragmented. There are also kind of fights between politicians. Tribunals are called for, and most of civil society, many of the branch organizations are silent. It's like we in the Netherlands said, you elected politicians, you should sort it out yourself. We are blaming the president of the second chamber. We are cursing the politicians that they cannot get their act together. But in the meanwhile, we have a very large groups of civil society organizations. The representatives of labor, the representatives of businesses, we have a lot of, but they are silent. It is as if we have left the fate of our democracy in the hands of these elected politicians by themselves. So, yes, before we start electing a dictator by majority, I think there can be much more done by many other groups who otherwise would lobby the parliament to get their specific narrow interest into legislation. These groups can also stand up and own democracy.
If I could add one point. Traditionally, the extreme right has been saying very bad things about democracy. And today, they've changed their approach. They don't attack democracy in a frontal manner. They are much more shrewd. They say, of course, we are democratic. Of course, we do not envisage to come to power through other means than elections. But it's after. What happens when, okay, you won the election, but do you accept to lose the election, to have lost the election? Look what happened on January 6, 2021, with the march to the Capitol. If you want to understand what is the threat to democracy represented by extreme forces, this is that. It never happened before in American history. And it came close to absolute catastrophe, encouraged by the defeated President of the United States.
Well, these are, I think, good closing words for an... hopeful words for an evening in which we have seen that the situation is indeed difficult. It is a big problem, the polarization, but there are still things that we can do. Professor Yassukayet has a full program with 3 points, and you showed us that there is reason for hope, that some people are changing, and that's at least a good message to take home. I would like to thank the 3 speakers, Mitchell, Dominique Moisy, Kutsal Yassukayet, for discussing all this with us. And we have a few little presents for them. They seem to be quite wet, the presents. Yeah.
Flowers to No, it's for you. No, on top of it, I'm going back to London tomorrow. So
Okay, well, I would like to give you this then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mwah.
I would like also to thank Julia for leading the debate, and my fellow committee members who helped organize this day, the technician. And of course, those organizations that helped to make this possible this evening. First of all, Leiden University Fund. You've seen the video message that they have given. They also made this meeting possible today. And we got additional support from Leiden City Council this year, for which we are also very grateful. Unfortunately, the people at home I can't invite for a drink. You have to take care of that yourself. But those who are here in the reception rooms, drinks will be served and you can continue the discussion. Thank you for coming and listening.